Hey, get a little comfortable. Thank you for stopping by. If you're here for the first time, my name is Joseph. I am a certified life coach, a published author, and a music artist, and I post a lot of content related to self-awareness and spirituality and a whole lot of things in between that. So if that is your bag, this may be your safe space, but I'm doing something a little different right now. I want to talk about something that's very vulnerable, very transparent, and I hardly talk about anything personal on this channel. A lot of my vulnerable, transparent stuff, they're in my books, in my published books. So I talk very candidly about my backstory, my background, and I even have a video here where I talk about my personal timeline and how I've gotten to this point in my life. But for those of you who are here and that you're new, you're seeing me for the first time, or you've seen me in passing, you don't know who I am, but somehow you feel drawn to the insights, I'd like to take this moment to invite you into who Joseph is personally, how Joseph processes things, which will probably give you a better understanding as to why I speak the way that I speak, why I approach topics the way that I approach them, and just the way that I have my entire ecosystem set up. Because the way that I approach things can throw some people off. But for those of you who are really paying attention and you're tuned in to the frequency, as they say, then this often leaves room for your own personal self-reflection and your own personal processing. A year ago, I spoke about not being relationship material, about resonance-driven connection, about the fear of dying alone, and about being ahead of the curve in awareness when the people around me are moving at a survival speed. I'm still not friendship or relationship material, not in the conventional sense. I don't have any bosom friends or romantic partners, and I'm still very much thinking about mortality, my mortality. But the context a year later has shifted because some things have really transpired that really have shaken some things up, not only in my personal life, but in my professional life, my public facing experience, and my private life. So what's changed here has been my perspective on the perceived promised land. We often think when we're on a healing journey, personal development journey, we're trying to get to some ultimate state of healing, some ultimate state of awareness, some ultimate state of enlightenment. And for many people, we read about these things in religious texts, like the Jewish people when they were freed from, or when they left Egypt, they were going to the promised land. Or we think about American slavery here. We think about the blacks and indigenous folks reaching toward the promised land within a very controlled environment. But the promised land isn't a physical space. It's not a physical mark that you get to in this physical life. It's internal. It's an internal space of immediate clarity, immediate honesty, immediate transparency, and vulnerability with yourself. And I've been on my journey consciously for a decade. Since 2016, I've been in this space of exploration, this space of awareness and unlearning, deconditioning, relearning, or remembering, as I like to say, more of who I am and more of what I'm capable of doing and being in this experience. And as a result, I'm no longer reaching for my promised land. I'm already standing in it. The clarity, the coherence, the ability to see the external structure for what it is, that is the promised land. It's this present reality. And this changes everything about what I'm looking for and what I'm exploring in connection with those who connect with me personally and publicly. I'm not looking for anyone to rescue me from that gap. I'm actually observing the terrain to see who can meet me in the clarity that I'm standing in right now. Most people are intrigued by the idea of me. They often want to transform themselves or challenge their beliefs in proximity to my clarity. And I often have to stand by and watch them process themselves while they figure out if they want to stay in proximity or exit. And often I come in contact with those who are able to speak my language and move at my speed, but then it becomes extractive. They often use my clarity as a crutch for them to not take responsibility for things that they can actually take responsibility for. My nervous system feels that immediately, and then I have to release myself. But then there are the rare ones. I often don't like using the word rare, and that's why I'm using air quotes for rare and ahead of the curve, because no one's rare and no one's ahead of the curve. We're all existing within a system here that keeps us blocked and away from our internal promised land. So there's nothing new about me. There's nothing different about me that's not present within you. Everyone is just at a different speed in terms of getting to that realization. And so that little nuance matters a lot here. But because it's not actively and readily available in real time, then I use the word, the rare in quotes. And the rare ones are usually the ones who don't really speak my language or moving at my speed, but they are genuinely curious about me without it feeling like an extractive pull. They can often receive what it is that I have to offer without feeling the need for me to complete them. You see what I'm saying? That's what I'm actually observing now in my experience. Not particularly resonance that match mine, but resonance that honors mine. Now, a year ago, I talked about the fear of dying alone, or this fear of no one knowing if I passed, or if my affairs will be handled properly once I'm gone, or if my legacy will be pieced together from outsiders and strangers who never really knew who I was while I was alive. And yes, that fear is still real, but it's often less about romantic partnerships and more about whether I'll have one proportional, reciprocal partner or relationship by the time that I need to prepare to make an exit. I know this is an uncomfortable conversation to have, but for me, I'm able to have these kinds of conversations because being able to have these kinds of conversations keep you present. It trains you how to be present with where you are. And I say this because I've lost a significant amount of people who were close to me in my life, and it's caused me to reflect a lot, and it's caused me to face a lot of the discomfort of these kinds of conversations, because I think that's a big fear for a lot of people, because you don't want to be a burden on those you leave behind financially, materially, or relationally. And we live in an environment, we live in a grid that often makes it extremely difficult to prepare. On one end, it feels cruel, it feels unfair, but you got to be very careful of spiraling in that story, because yes, there is rage there, there's frustration there, there's anger there, there is that, but you can feel and process that without spiraling into that story, because that story is extractive in and of itself. Because everything always works itself out. And one of the mantra, or at least the thing that I often say to myself, is that the external conditions proportionately favor my internal preferences. They always do. Whether I see it as that in the right now moment or not, it's always happening, because my needs are constantly being met. I'm receiving provisions when I need them, but oftentimes it's not meeting the bigger need. And I think that's the frustration. Sometimes you're not getting the bigger need met in real time, so it makes you think about your mortality. And this is the fine line of what I'm talking about. And it can be slippery, but in talking about it and really bringing voice to it and naming the thing, it makes it less of an anxiety-inducing thing. Now, speaking of small provisions, this time last year, I did ask the question, if my life has been a series of small provisions that don't meet the bigger need, then how can I trust that my afterlife experience won't mirror that same thing? I asked that last year, but then this year, I ask it differently. Will I have enough material stability and relational reciprocity before I need to make that transition? Will I get to enjoy what I've helped anchored here on this planet? Or will what I've produced just become archival work? All the videos, all the books, all the content being held in this space and lands in a very big way in the world after I'm gone. I often think about the Charles Dickens short story, The Signalman, that speaks to this very uncomfortable thing where the signalman saw premonition of something that was off coming. He couldn't quite name it. And even when he could name it, he was surrounded by people who couldn't quite get it or weren't quite moving at the speed to where he could actually make adjustments to prevent or soften whatever was going to happen. And so by the end of the story, the clarity came after he was gone. The help came after he was gone. And that is often labeled as the big human tragedy. And I'm here to challenge that because it's not so much a tragedy as it is a structural strategy. And when you get out of that moralized state of thinking that something is wrong, you're being tested, you're being tortured in some way, then you can see the design and the mechanics for what it is. And what it is, as simply as I can put it in this video, is it's a preset timing system. We have the calendar, the time clock, all of that's preset. And so when we look at a calendar, it has preset lunar cycles, it has preset holidays, preset events, preset celebrations. We look at the time clock, it has its own pulse. And so the rhythm of time, as it's been preset, is completely different from the internal rhythm. And so this is going back to the whole point of you being your own promised land, you being your own healed state, you being your own enlightened state. You being your own awakened state. Everyone's awakened. Everyone's healed. Everyone's arrived. We're just in the process of slowly or quickly getting to know that. And it's disorienting when you have that awareness and you realize that you're still stuck on preset timing and distortions. So when we experience these things, we often think that it is a tragedy. And then we glorify and we label endurance as a badge of honor. Endurance is not a badge of honor. It's really just a reaction to survival consequences, to survival mode, hustle and bustle. We're working with a system that is using our time and our energy and our attention against us constantly. When you look at it from that angle, it's not morbid, it's not tragical, it's just the honest truth. It's the actual consequences, the actual stakes of what we have to deal with until we disengage. That's why no one's ahead of the curve and no one's rare and no one's chosen. And to be honest with you, a year ago, it felt like torture. I was in that state where everything just felt like a tragedy. Everything felt like an inevitable tragedy. But it was getting me closer and closer to refining the language, refining the perspective, refining the way that I was showing up for myself. So the clarity here is I'm already in my promised land. I'm already in my happily ever after. And I'm being reminded of that every season, it seems, or I often have to be reminded of that when I'm not being met or when the larger need is not being met in real time. Because when the larger need is not being met in real time, then this can create the spiral and it can make you forget that, wait, I already have what I need. I already know what it is that I want. I already know what's clear for me. I can't force anyone to arrive here with me. I can only keep my signal clean and observe the terrain to see who's ready to cross the threshold. And the ones who get it immediately, they integrate and move at their own path and expand the path itself. And the ones who almost get it, but then they tend to intellectualize it too much, that can be extractive because they're often trying to make embodied clarity fit into an intellectualized framework. And there will always be friction there. And of course, there are the ones who don't get it or won't get it and they won't even care. That's totally fine with me. That's less work for me. Now, to the rare ones who do or who don't speak my language or who don't move at the speed that I move at, but are genuinely receiving without extracting anything from me, those are the ones worth staying present with, even if their capacity to meet me in the middle is still developing. I often say that in this process of moving through the threshold, you're going through the refiner's fire, and the refiner's fire is there to burn up what's not pure and what's not clean and what's not true, and to refine what is clean and what is pure and what is true. It can be a very disorienting process. You can't just sit in the disorientation. You got to process the disorientation. There's a difference between sitting with something and processing something, or more specifically, there's a difference between sitting with your feelings and processing your feelings. Sitting with your feelings is an intellectualized awareness of what you're feeling. You can name it, you can define it, and it makes sense conceptually, but processing your feelings takes it a step further. You now have got to interrogate in real time that story that you've created in your head about what you're feeling. The disempowered story, because it's a negative story, and that negative story will have you spinning and spiraling into doom and gloom, and you often have to go and sedate yourself with something. And so the point here is to feel the disorientation and challenge the story. What is the story? What story am I telling myself about this discomfort? Interrogate it. Reframe the story. Yes, at any given moment you can change the story. Change the story. If you want a positive spin on it, observe what's negative about it. And then ask yourself, can something positive be created from this? Can joy be created from this? Can something different than this be created from this? And 9 times out of 10, the answer is yes. So reframe the story. And then start speaking to the discomfort. Start speaking with it. Start breathing with it. Start drinking water with it. Start eating your food with it. Dance with it. Sing with it. This is how you humanize that disorienting, discomforting feeling of being able to step into your truth. And then the disorientation, the discomfort naturally passes through. Then the retrospective meaning that you assign to the disorientation now looks and it feels differently. But then you still have to deal with the mismatches in connections, the mismatches in environments that are opposite of what you're building internally in real time. A year ago, I was terrified of almost connections, those mismatched connections. And I could see them quite clearly, but oftentimes I had no control over when they showed up. And that's the twist. When you're navigating this environment, you can't force yourself out of the conditions. You can't control the conditions. You can only control your response to it. Your emotional response, your intellectual response, and your behavioral response to the conditions. And that's the paradox. You have to endure the condition while showing up in a way that expands the condition. And your response to the condition is the balm or the key, the ingredient to expanding the condition. Now, the almost connections. As of this video, I do have one. And this is something that I often don't talk about publicly in terms of just my personal journey toward connections or having connections. But there is one person that I do feel clean resonance with in my experience. He's a musician. He's not at my speed, doesn't speak my language, and is not available in the way that I prefer. But there's no extraction there, just genuine curiosity. It's a clean sense of ease that I've never really experienced in connection with anyone. And when we speak, there is a seamless flow to the conversation without it needing to be anything more than it is in the moments that we speak. And I'm watching to see if his capacity expands, if clarity lands in a way that opens something more, which is different from the torture of almost connections, because when you think of almost connections, you often subject everyone to a script. They've got to be a certain height, a certain age, a certain income bracket, a certain this, a certain that, and their orientation have to be a certain thing. Their lifestyle and life structure has to be a certain. It becomes a Build-A-Bear version of what you think someone should be, and even a Build-A-Bear idea of what you think you should be. When you're clearing that out as you get deeper and deeper to your truth, then that checklist starts to become less and less relevant to your experience. And then you start connecting with resonance. You start connecting with truth. You start connecting with ease. You start connecting with things that don't spike your nervous system. People that don't spike your nervous system. What I know now, I didn't know then. The desire for long-term relationship isn't rooted in the fear of dying alone. It's rooted in the need for proportional reciprocity while I'm still alive. I don't need someone to validate my clarity. A year ago, I felt like I was floating around, seeing everything, but unable to interfere or engage physically, emotionally, personally, with anything or anybody. Like I could only really move when I was invited or when a coded resonance pulled me in. Now I understand that I'm not floating helplessly in this experience. I'm standing in my promised land. I'm standing in my happily ever after, sending a signal to the field, punctuating the algorithm online and offline. The floating is actually the clarity itself. It exists independent of whether anyone validates it. The ones who are ready, they automatically align with the signal. They resonate with it. They either cross the threshold or they don't. But my job isn't to force them across. My job is to keep the signal clean. The musician moves at his own speed. I move at my own speed. The signal continues to circulate. And if you relate to this experience, then keep your signal clean. Keep it circulating. Be immediately honest with where you are. Speak your heart, speak your clarity, and let your promised land and your happily ever after exist whether anyone sees it or not. That's it for now. I'm gonna love and let go. If you benefited from anything that I've shared here, and if you have a clearer insight on who I am, feel free to join the space, subscribe if you're not already subscribed. Like, comment, share the video to those who you feel may resonate well with it. And in the meantime and in between time, please be kind, be gentle with yourself in this right now moment and the right now moments to come.